So I'm excited today to talk with Dr. Amy Saltzman, who is a holistic physician, a mindfulness coach, scientist, wife, mother, devoted student of transformation, longtime athlete, and occasional poet. I want to talk to you about poetry at some point because that's become not so much writing it, but reading it has become a passion of mine. Amy has written 3 books, all around the concept of a still, quiet place, which is, I think, a very vivid description of where we want to be when we're trying to be in the moment and accomplish something. So one is a still, quiet place, a mindfulness program for teaching children and adolescents to ease stress and difficult emotions. Another one is Still Quiet Place for athletes, which I had the good fortune to write the foreword for. Thank you, Amy. And then a Still Quiet, and then a Still Quiet Place for teens, which, boy, I think we all remember our teen years. And it's, if anything, it's a harsher world for teens to grow up in today. So, Amy, thanks for having this conversation with me. And let's start with the basics. What is mindfulness?
So I'm going to give you a definition and then we're going to break it down. So the definition of mindfulness is paying attention here and now with kindness and curiosity so that we can choose our behavior. So paying attention here and now means doing our best to be in this moment and not ruminating about the past or obsessing or fantasizing about the future. With kindness and curiosity just reminds us that those are the qualities that we want to bring to how we pay attention to ourselves and to our circumstances, because otherwise, as humans, we're very prone to beating ourselves up and only noticing our mistakes and being pretty hard on ourselves. And when we pay attention here and now with kindness and curiosity to our thoughts, our feelings, our physical sensations, and our teammates or our housemates and the world around us, then we have all the information we need to choose our behavior, to make wise and compassionate and skillful choices.
You know, that definition hits me in a lot of different ways. I've defined vision. I actually got this from Jim Collins and Jerry Porras, but vision as a sense of possibility. And no matter what kind of a situation we are in, there is a possibility to move things forward and make it better. But if we're not present, we're not going to see those opportunities. The other thing that strikes me is definition of courage of character that I ran across a while back and I've adopted, which is character is doing the right thing when it matters. And again, to do something when it matters, we have to be present to see what the opportunities are there.
Yeah, and we have to be able to discern what is the right, wise, kind, compassionate, skillful thing in that moment.
Yeah, discern is another great word. Why don't we jump in to talk about your sports experience, and would it have been enhanced had you had the tools and the ideas and the presence of mindfulness when you were an athlete? I'm sure you're still an athlete, but
I am still an athlete. And I think there's 2 things to say about my sports experience. Long before I ever heard the word mindfulness, I do feel that my sports experience, and I was a competitive gymnast initially and then a competitive cyclist, was my first mindfulness practice. I just didn't know it at the time. But as a gymnast, if you're not in the present moment, you're probably going to fall off the beam and get hurt. So there was a way that I was developing my natural, innate ability for mindfulness. And I do think we all have that ability. As a gymnast, well before I heard that term in my 30s. And then on the flip side, for sure, if I'd been taught mindfulness as it applied to my sport, it definitely would have enhanced my sports performance. And almost everyone I share mindfulness with says, I wish I'd learned it earlier.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned that jumps out at me too is the curiosity and kindness. And I heard a phrase a while back, again, I adapted it for myself or adopted it, that gentleness with self is the gateway to courage. And often we think that if we're going to improve, and we screw up, we got to beat ourselves up. Can you, what would gentleness with self, if you'd had that concept when you were younger, what would that have meant to you?
Well, I'm actually going to pull from you now and combine it with a couple things. So one example of gentleness with self is your mistake ritual. And just having that ability to, and now I'm going to combine your mistake ritual with Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion. And self-compassion means being aware of a moment of difficulty, remembering that all human beings have moments of difficulty, and then offering yourself, or maybe in the case of a teammate, compassion in that moment of difficulty. And the lovely thing about your mistake ritual is it combines all of those into something super short and simple that can be done in the run of play. So if you've chosen a mistake ritual before you're competing, then that little motion, brushing off your shoulder or flushing or cutting yourself some slack, that can bring like a sense of lightness, a sense of kindness, a sense of humor. You're letting the previous moment go and you're bringing yourself back to the present. So your mistake ritual is very rich, and I'm just kind of pulling out the components of it to emphasize them.
Amy, thank you. I heard what you said about everyone has these moments of difficulties. I was just reading a book called The Rivalry about Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain and the golden age of basketball. I think you could argue that today is the golden age of basketball, but these were two incredible athletes. And the problems they had that this book points out that we didn't know when we were just fans of them. Bill Russell threw up before every game. And if he didn't throw up, his teammates, worried about him. He had so much anxiety that so many people, it seems to me, they're kind of cruising and everything is good. And it's like, why can't I be like that? But as you point out, everyone has these moments of difficulty.
Right. And I think that's why we can now be really grateful for Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka and Michael Phelps and Kevin Love for really being honest and telling the truth about that, so that first of all, we can offer compassion for them, and second of all, and for ourselves, and that also we're not comparing to some idealized Instagram feed and thinking, oh, well, these people don't have these issues. We're all humans. We all struggle. And that's why cultivating compassion for ourselves and compassion for others is crucial.
Yeah. How does the practice of mindfulness, you mentioned Mistake Ritual and Positive Coaching Alliance, which is really focused on youth sports, developing better athletes, better people through sports. How does the practice of mindfulness, and I do mean practice because it's not something we ever perfect, how can that benefit youth coaches and youth sports parents?
Well, I think, right, it's a whole environment. So we have the athlete, and we have the coach, and we have the parent, and often, the club director. But each of those people is a human being. And if any one person in the environment is practicing mindfulness, it benefits the person and the entire group. So let's leave the athlete out of it for a moment. But if a coach can be aware that he or she is becoming frustrated, and they can feel that feeling in their body, and they can maybe, recognize that they're pacing on the sideline, or that their tone of voice is changing. If in that moment the coach can breathe and pause and choose what he or she's going to say or not say to the athlete or the team in that moment, right? That can change the trajectory of a game, or even a season, or even an athlete's whole career. And often, if the coach can't choose wisely, the best thing to do is to not speak in that moment and let the wave of intensity pass. Maybe not even do a lot at halftime, and then talk about, have some time to reflect and talk about it the next day. So that each reactive moment builds tension, and each responsive moment builds calm, and calm allows for us to move into a state of flow. And then with parents, it's really similar, right? There's all this conversation about the car ride home. And often the best thing the parents can do on the car ride home is simply be there, and hand the athlete some water and something to eat, and wait for the athlete to speak. And as parents, because we're not the coaches, even though sometimes we get confused about that, I find a practice of, I love to watch you play, to be really helpful, but you want to be super specific. I loved how after you got beat by that defender, you got back up and really chased them down. I loved your perseverance. I loved how you helped your teammate up, either physically or emotionally. Because when we do that as parents, what we're teaching our children to do is what I call positive scanning. We're teaching them to, even if it was a really rough game, we're teaching them to notice the places that they did perform with excellence, and leave the critique to the coach.
Yeah, there's a lot more emphasis now on empathy than there used to be. And, noting, specifically saying, when your teammate was down, like you mentioned, I really liked seeing you go over and give them a pat on the back or whatever. That mindfulness, that positive scanning, I've created a lot of phrases that start with positive, but that's a new one, positive scanning. I really like that. And then that empathy, I think, it really makes connections between people that strengthens a team.
Right. And it just takes one person, one athlete, one coach, one parent, to choose to positive scan and to encourage. And I don't mean to be Pollyanna-ish about it, or one person to really get down and bring the whole group down. And so if we can become aware of our habits, each of us can contribute to the team culture and to the environment and to the energy that we're bringing in each moment.
I think one of the hardest things to do, especially if you're, I think there's some people who speak easily and jump in, other people who kind of hold back. And for somebody who, and I think probably both you and I are the kind of person who finds it easy to jump in and say something. Often the hardest thing in the world is to say nothing, to just let the moment sit. And the one thing you know, if you don't say something that moment, is you won't say something that you regret.
Yeah, and it often leaves the space also for that person who doesn't tend to jump in, who may have been sitting back and observing with kindness and curiosity, to offer that piece of wisdom or motivation, instead of somebody saying something reactively. If we leave that space, a teammate may step in and say something really, really skillful.
You mentioned flow state. Can you say a little bit about what flow is and why it's a good thing to have if you're an athlete or just a person? And how does mindfulness, that's a long question, but how does mindfulness connect to flow?
Okay, so let's talk ever so briefly about the science of flow. So the science of flow, there are actually 9 components of flow, and I'm not going to list them all. They're listed in my book if someone wants to look at them. But I think the feeling of flow is something we all know. It's when, the other terms for it are like being in the zone, and it's when our body, mind, and heart is in sync. And if we're playing a team sport, it's often that we're also in sync with our teammates. And there's a sense of effortlessness to it. There's a sense of joy to it. You're not really thinking about the score or the particular, offense or defense that you're running. It's coming, you've practiced all these things and it's coming naturally, but there's a sense of ease and joy and flow to it. And we've all had those moments, whether it's playing sports or looking at a sunset or, laughing with friends. And in terms of mindfulness's relationship to flow, my sense is that it makes us flow ready or more likely to experience flow. It doesn't ensure flow, but the more we practice mindfulness, the more likely we are to experience flow.
Flow ready, I love that. That's great. You've done a lot
That's
of work.
borrowed from our friend George Mumford, just so that we're giving credit where credit is due.
Yeah, no, that's great. You've done a lot of work around mental health. And can we talk a little bit about how does mindfulness fit in and benefit mental health?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things for athletes that's super powerful about mindfulness is that there's good data to show that mindfulness enhances performance. So athletic performance for student athletes, academic performance, it enhances relationships, and at the same time, it decreases stress, it decreases anxiety, it decreases depression. It actually decreases the likelihood of injury and increases the kind of the speed of rehab. And so I don't want to be too grandiose, but it's kind of an all-purpose thing. And the thing is, as humans, often we are simultaneously wanting to enhance our performance, and we're feeling stressed or anxious or depressed. And mindfulness can address both of those simultaneously. And the data for both enhancing performance and improving mental health is really solid at this point.
It seems to me that it's harder to have robust mental health and for kids growing up today than when you and I were growing up. It just seems like the world it's a harsher place. And, I think thinking about about climate change, I gave a talk on climate change at our church a couple of years ago, and my grandson and granddaughter happened to be there, and I didn't even hear this, but my grandson heard our assistant minister say they only have 10 years or before the end of the world. And he went home and told his mom, and it's like, I think all the challenges kids have today, plus hearing about 1 billion animals were killed in the fires in Australia a year or so ago, and 1 billion sea creatures were killed in the Pacific Northwest with the heat dome. When kids hear that, it's got to amp up the anxiety incredibly.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things is there's kind of the shorthand is anxiety tends to live in the future and depression tends to live in the past. And as you said, possibility tends to live in the present moment. And so it doesn't mean whether it's a climate crisis or a big match or a final in school that we're going to ignore the future. But at the same time, if we anchor ourselves in the present moment, it's what can I do and this is choosing our behavior. What can I do that's going to be most effective and supportive in this moment to have the outcome that I want in the future? But the only place that we can act is in the present moment. Yeah. And if we're consumed by anxiety, we may not make the best choices. Whereas if we can learn practices to come into the present moment and to be calm, then we can make the choice to, in the terms of climate crisis, ride our bike to practice rather than to drive, or to make 10 note cards for the final, or to go back out into the driveway and shoot 100 free throws. Those are constructive choices that we can use to address and prepare for the future events, rather than letting ourselves spin out of anxiety.
That's those 3 states it's the way you put it is brilliant. Anxiety is living in the future, depression is living in the past, and possibility is in the present. That's simple enough for people to remember, I think. And speaking of that, what if for the people who are watching this, listening to it, and want to take away some really practical things, what are 1 or 2 things that you would suggest that coaches can use, or athletes can use, parents can use, anybody can use to improve in performance?
Okay, so if I get to share 2 things, my 2 things are always the same. And these are covered in more detail in my books. But the first one is learning to bring your kindness and curiosity to your feelings. And so again, like I described, when the coach was getting frustrated, or an athlete's getting frustrated, or parents getting frustrated, it's being aware of, okay, my shoulders are getting tense, my heart's beating faster. I recognize this. This is a moment of frustration. Feelings come in waves. I'm gonna observe this wave. I don't need to change it or to fix it. I'm simply gonna allow it to pass. And then I'm going to respond. And one of the interesting things is, as I was describing, if you're my teammate and you have a big wave of anxiety or frustration, and I have a big wave of anxiety or frustration, and those combine, we get an even bigger wave. But if I'm having a wave of anxiety and frustration and you say, it's okay, next play, then the wave, our communal wave, our team wave kind of subsides. And so both for ourselves and for our teammates, and we all have teams, even if we're individual athletes in individual sports, we train in groups, we live in families, or we live in dorms, and so if even one person can bring that sense of peace and ease and possibility and calm, that can be really helpful. So being aware of feelings, being able to allow them to arise and pass away without letting them consume us. And then that allows for the second thing that I like to teach is responding, which means choosing wisely our actions. Or again, sometimes the best thing is not to say anything or do anything in the moment if we're so frustrated that, we're just going to make matters worse. But being able to respond rather than react out of habit and, yell at the ref or shove the opponent or whatever it is, it's just like take a breath, step back, reset, and go from there. And so being able to be with intense feelings, which actually takes practice. It's a little bit like lifting weights or running intervals. It's a skill, and it's something that we need to develop, and it can be intentionally developed. That is going to allow us to respond in moments of difficulty rather than react out of habit.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. So what would the second practice be?
Well, the second practice is building on the first so by being able to just befriend our intense feelings, that allows us to respond rather than react. And if you're going to give me another one, it would probably be compassion for self and compassion for others. So in those difficult moments, if we can offer ourselves compassion, if we can offer our teammate compassion, that is a response that allows us to reset. And it can be as something as simple as a phrase or putting your hand on your own heart and just saying, you got this, or putting your hand on your teammate's shoulder and saying, we're going to get it back. But those moments of compassion and resetting can be invaluable.
Yeah. How important is it that we tie all this to success in sports? I was pretty stunned when before I started Positive Coaching Alliance coaching, first of all, how important winning was to me. But it seems like so many coaches, even if they're coaching 7, 8, 9-year-olds, if we win, we feel better. If we lose, we feel bad. How important is it to tie mindfulness and the things we're talking about to a better team?
Well, I think there's two pieces, and I'm smiling because often tying mindfulness to success in sports is what gets an athlete or a coach or a parent interested, because that is their priority to begin with. But often what happens afterwards is they realize, oh, wow, this is so much more than success in sports. And it is helping me be successful in sports, but it's also helping me be successful in school or at work or in my relationships. And I think one of the chapters in my book is called There's a Winner and a Learner. And as long as if we're focusing on winning, then our sense of self-worth is going to go up and down depending on our performance. If we're focused on learning mindfulness, learning the skills of our sports, learning how to relate to people better, then first of all, our sense of self-worth is not only tied to our sport, it's broader, which is really important, because one of the things that we're seeing is that athletes who identify only as athletes are way more at risk for anxiety, depression, suicide, substance use, etc. So it makes our perspective of ourselves broader. And ironically, the more we're learning, both on and off the court, the better we perform. So if we kind of take, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but if we take the focus off of winning and put it on learning, we actually often end up winning more. And I want winning to be in two definitions: winning by evolving as human beings, but also just winning on the scoreboard. And it's fine and natural for competitive athletes to want to win. I think the problem comes when it becomes all-consuming.
I've often thought that sports where you have an individual record, like swimming or running, are easier to do some of this stuff, because you can get beat by a long ways, but if you've shortened your time by 2 or 3 seconds, you can feel good about that. In a team game, like you're playing softball, and the pitcher is so good that you just aren't going to win. It's hard to come away from that saying, well, I hung in there every time I got at bat. I didn't get negative, and I took good swings. That's possible, but it's easier when it's like, oh, your time was 3 seconds better than before.
Right. And this is why, particularly in those sports where it's not, where you can't clearly see the time on the clock, this is why that skill of positive scanning is important to develop and cultivate, because you can start to see, well, I didn't give up. I did take good swings. I kept my calm. I kept my focus. Okay, the bat didn't connect with the ball, but I stood there. I took those pitches, and like, wow, I was closer than I was before. But it takes some deliberate work to find those things in a sport that's not measured by seconds.
I think that positive scanning is such a positive, powerful idea. When I was a kid, I just came back from vacation in Minnesota, and we'd drive through a small town, and there'd be a baseball field there, and it reminded me of how much I loved baseball when I was a kid. And if I had had the concept of a good at bat, one of the things I learned in business school at Stanford was there's a difference between a good decision and a good outcome. I always thought, well, if it turns out well, I must have made a good decision. But so you can have a good at bat, but the pitcher can be so strong that you still don't get a hit. And that takes that mindfulness, the presence, and maybe the habit of doing positive scanning.
Yeah, and it's something that people can. It's a skill that people can practice. And again, in the book, there's actually like a calendar for, a week of every time when you come home from practice, pick 3 things that you did well, and do your best not to let the yes but creep in. And the other thing is also true, right? You can get a hit, and honestly, it can be all your bad habits, right? You can take a swing that results in a base hit or maybe even a home run, but it's not what you were practicing. And so, as you said, separating the action from the outcome gives us a lot of freedom. And the freer we are, the more likely we are to experience flow. So it's like, I can only control my participation. I can't control the outcome. And so, it's, can I do my best in this moment and be satisfied with that?
What about, this is so stimulating, Amy, thank you. What about life off the court, off the playing field? I like to encourage coaches to say that sports is a dress rehearsal for life. How do the skills we're talking about, how do they help us all off the court?
Well, it's interesting because the actual end of the tagline of my book says achieving peak performance and finding flow in sports and in life. And to me, the in life piece is just as important as the in sports piece. And no matter who you are as an athlete, at some point, you're no longer going to be a competitive athlete. And so part of my interest in teaching these skills to athletes is so that they have them for the rest of their life. So for example, right, you were talking about being in business school or just being in business period, right? The same principles apply. Can you watch your wave of feeling? Can you observe your thoughts and maybe realize that some of them might not be true or might not be helpful? Can you choose in a heated business meeting to respond rather than react? Even if the deal falls apart, can you positive scan and say, wow, even though that was a really aggressive meeting, I kept my cool. Even though they were really fixed in how they wanted to do things, I was creative, I was collaborative. Okay, it didn't go the way I wanted it to go. It didn't have the outcome I wanted it to have, but I'm actually really happy with how I performed. And I don't want to give the sense that we only positive scan. I mean, there's a place for looking at our performance critically and seeing what can be improved. But then let's just take it not from, not on the field, not in a professional environment, but let's take it home to our kitchens and our kitchen tables, right? Same thing. If I can be aware, and I'm going to use a parent example now, but if I can be aware that I'm really frustrated because my kid's falling behind in their homework and they dumped their practice gear on the floor for the 5 billionth time, and I had a rough day at work and I still have emails to answer and I'm getting agitated, if in that moment I can take a breath and say to my kid, honey, look, I'm really frustrated. A little bit of it has to do with you. Some of it has to do with work. Some of it has to do with the dishwasher's not working. And it's what I call mindfulness out loud. Like if you acknowledge it to yourself and to your child, then they get to see that, oh, when mom or dad has big, intense emotions, they are bringing kindness and curiosity to it, and they're pausing and choosing their behavior. Then that's a skill that can become a family skill. And it can actually, there are things I teach where it can actually almost become like a family joke. So I talk about falling in a hole, and a family, if a family has that as a concept, or a team, an athletic team or a business team has it as a concept, then everybody can say, oops, wait, we fell in the hole. Let's take a pause and figure out how we're going to get out. Because we're all going to have those moments where we don't respond skillfully and we do react. And then it's okay, now how do we recover? And it's okay, so sorry I yelled at you. Yes, the gear bag on the floor and this dirty, stinky laundry everywhere bugs me, but really this was what's going on, and let's talk about it. That can help. And one of the interesting things, I think somewhere maybe before the tape started rolling, you were talking about straws on the camel's back or something, but it's for each interaction where we respond, we're taking a straw off the camel's back. So if I have a place where I might have yelled at my kid and then carried that with me into work, and then carried that with me into my coaching when I'm coaching later, if I don't yell at my kid, then I'm not carrying that forward into the day. Or if I don't yell at my athlete, I'm not carrying that back home for dinner. Or if as an athlete, I don't yell at my teammate, then I'm not carrying that into the evening when I'm doing my homework. And so for each wise response that we make, we're kind of lightening our load.
Yeah, that mindfulness out loud is a great phrase. I used narrated modeling. So the example I remember talking to coaches about is, the other coach is working the official, and there's a lot of trash talking and just not fair, and I'm getting upset about it. And if I just do nothing, which is the best thing often, it can be misinterpreted by parents, like, that coach doesn't know the rules, or that coach, it doesn't care really. And
Right.
so I started narrating. It's like, that situation in the third inning was really frustrating, but it's really important to me to honor the game and to be a model. And I think parents could do that. Wow, wouldn't that be amazing if kids could see their parents under pressure using these tools? That just, I'm getting chills just thinking about that. That's amazing.
Well, and the thing is, not only can you, what did you call it?
Narrated modeling.
Narrated modeling. The thing is, not only can you do it after, but
In the
you
moment.
could do it in the moment, at least to the kids on the bench. And you could say, wow, I notice I'm feeling really frustrated. I really want to yell at the ref or the other coach, or like go talk to them. And I'm choosing to honor the game and put my focus in the moment. And maybe I'll talk to the other coach after or whatever. But it's like, because the kids are probably also getting frustrated. And so when you say, I'm getting frustrated, feeling frustrated, and here are the choices I'm making, it's like, oh, the kid goes, wow, I could make that choice too. I'm frustrated. That was a terrible call, but I'm going to do what Coach Jim is doing. And I'm going to put my focus back in the moment, and I'm going to honor the game.
Yeah, that's, like I said, I got a little chill thinking about that. I remember years ago reading about, some kid comes out of a really tough situation, maybe a high school that's underperforming and doesn't get as much money as some of the rich private schools. And that person, in spite of all the odds, becomes famous, and that person comes back to talk to the kids. And there's sort of a couple choices. One is, I'm special, I made it. The other one is, I was where you are, and I worked so hard, and I made these kind of choices. So it's like connecting with the other people, like, you could do what I'm doing. It just that modeling and seeing, especially somebody that you admire, or like your parent or your coach. Like I said, I'm getting chilled thinking about more and more of that. You said you're, I think the word was occasional poet. And I taught a spiritual poetry class at our church many years ago in person, but with COVID, I decided to start teaching, and I thought I'd teach 2 or 3 weeks. And last night we did our 67th class. And what I find is that I have a responsibility. I don't teach the class as much as curate it. I find 3 poems that are really meaningful to me, and then we read them out loud and we talk about them. And what I find is, if I'm discouraged or depressed or anxious, having to come up with those poems and going through different poems and picking them, it's almost always an encouraging, giving me more courage So I'm curious your experience with poetry.
Well, I think one of the gifts of poets and poetry is that good poetry is a description of a present moment. And generally, it's a description of a present moment with kindness and curiosity. And either it encourages us by pointing towards possibility, or it encourages us to simply face where we are and meet our present moment experience with kindness and curiosity. So it's if we go back to the pieces of self-compassion, right? A lot of poetry is being aware of a moment of difficulty, remembering that all human beings have moments of difficulty. So this is a universal experience, and bringing kindness and compassion to that moment. That's what the poet does. And then that helps the reader do the same thing. It's like, oh, yes, I recognize that. I'm thinking of the Olympic lead in, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Well, those are universal experiences. And if we can recognize it and see that other people have it and see that other people get through it, then that comes back to what you were saying about possibility.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Is there something I should have asked you that you'd like to respond to? We've covered a ton of amazing stuff here.
Well, I think the main thing that I want to say is that these are learnable skills, and they do take practice, and they do impact not only our sports performance, but our performance in life, our performance in relationship. And I just want to go back and emphasize that the data says that these skills improve performance and simultaneously enhance mental, emotional, and physical health. So it's definitely like a twofer, and it does build on itself. So again, every time you respond, every time you offer yourself kindness, every time you offer a teammate kindness, that gains momentum. And that these skills can be intentionally incorporated into athletic training, into team building, into a student athlete's life, into a team, into a family, into a club, into a business team or a creative team. They apply to everything. We just happen to be applying them to sports at the moment.
Right. No, that's lovely. I want to. We mentioned the books, with the Still Quiet Place theme, and I also want to mention your website, which is www.stillquietplace.com. I encourage people to go there to learn more about what you're doing, and the book, A Still Quiet Place for Athletes, is one of my favorites, and so really grateful to you.
Yeah, well, I'm
taking the
grateful
time.
too. And actually, I wanted to say I have an online course for introductory skills coming up in October. And if anyone puts PCA in the scholarship field, I will give back 10% to PCA. So if your listeners sign up for the course, I'll give back 10% of that to PCA, because I do believe that you are supporting coaches in cultivating these abilities, which is then helping the athletes and the parents cultivate these abilities. And it is changing the culture of sports, which I feel is crucial.
Thank you. And your course, people can get that, sign up for that on www.stillquietplace.com, your
Yep.
website.
And if
Fantastic.
someone wanted to book for a team or a club, I can do that as well. But there's also just dates for individual coaches or athletes to sign up as well.
Fantastic. Amy, thank you so much. This is wonderful. And a lot of people are going to benefit from this. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and thank you, and thank PCA for doing the awesome work that it's been doing for decades and decades, because it's definitely making a difference.
Thanks so much.